Thanks a lot. So Will Slikker again from Kaiser NorCal. I think Oren, who's one of my buddies, we actually work a mile away from each other, been totally different, almost opposite situations. I don't think he quite warned me that this was going to be a room full of people that are in private practice and a Kaiser guy talking about the benefits of Kaiser. But there are some things that are beneficial about being employed, being in a hybrid model, which is what Kaiser is. It's essentially a corporation that's an enormous, 9,000 person private practice, run more like a foundation sort of large corporation, not the same two-person private practice that Oren is talking about. So let's look at a little bit of what's going on the other side of the coin here. When we look at, get our scales out to try to weigh some of the pros and cons of the two different practice models, on one side, on a more foundation-based model, you have more security and regularity. And for some people here, it's like, well, regularity is not even something that I value or need. But for someone like me, for instance, I really enjoyed that I knew sort of what I was getting into, or what challenges I was going to face in terms of patient recruitment, and in terms of keeping your office full, and in terms of having regular surgeries to do. And that was something where I felt the regularity aspect for me was really interesting. On Oren's side, he's sort of the opposite. I mean, he is very independent. He's very autonomous. If you ever talk to him about some of his things he's doing as his own side hustles and some of the things he does outside of work, he really enjoys that sort of flexibility. And so on the private practice side, we've got autonomy and independence, and those are some of the core features. The next thing is predictability in a foundation-based model versus flexibility in private practice. So this is, again, one of the kind of core differences between the two things that we're all pretty aware of. Let's get into a little bit more detail, though. So on the foundation side, you're kind of responsible for keeping the organization happy. Whereas on the private practice side, you're more responsible for keeping the patient happy. And we both know that both those things are true. I'm definitely, my job and the way I see myself as a doctor is to keep patients happy, because that means hopefully I'm doing a good job. But it's interesting to weigh these two different ways of thinking about what you're doing on a day-to-day basis. The other thing that is really different between Oren and I, even though we're good friends, he enjoys running this small business in terms of his private practice, and having that be a component of his life that he excels at, but also that does take some time. I think we can all agree that there's going to be more time spent outside of the actual operating when you're doing a private practice in terms of running your private practice. So for people that are less motivated to go into a sort of a capitalistic private practice model, then foundation-based may have an advantage for that type of person. Again, when you're out at foundation or an employed model, you've got your practice is full day one. You walk in and you see your entire schedule is already built up for you, and in your surgeries collect from that clinic that's already full. Whereas in private practice, you're going to have to make sure you're spending some time building and collecting a patient base. The other thing about foundation-based or employed style is the reimbursement. It's more regular and consistent, and you don't have to wait and anticipate what your collections are going to be and how that's going to impact your month-to-month cash flow. So it's a little bit easier, perhaps, for me to calculate what my next 6 months is going to look like in terms of cash flow compared to some of my private practice friends who have some variability in ups and downs. Of course, we've seen that some with COVID's complications as well. In most employed models, you're not able to enjoy any equity. Kaiser actually does have a system for allowing you to buy into part of the practice, which is kind of interesting. But most of them, let's just say for argument's sake, don't have equity in your practice in an employed model. And we all know private practice, you are building that equity and hopefully into a sizable amount at some point. So back to more recent events with COVID, it was pretty interesting to talk to my private practice friends about what was happening with their practice when COVID kind of first started. And there were many that had the hospital basically tell them that they could not continue to operate on elective cases. And we can talk about things like PPP and those complexities, but that's pretty hard for someone that was trying to build up their practice as a young physician and then have COVID hit, and now they're sort of restricted from being able to do almost anything for a period of time. So that's just an interesting black swan type event that can happen that tended to affect my friends in private practice a little bit differently than myself. So the next one's insurance, and this is just sort of an annoyance, but malpractice insurance, I think we've all seen and talked to our peers and colleagues in OBGYN, where malpractice insurance has actually made a major impact on a lot of these people's lives, and to the point where they had to, kind of flee the state because the malpractice insurance was too expensive. Luckily, I don't think we're in that position, but it's just interesting to see how, getting malpractice insurance can be quite an annoyance. And of course, that's usually covered by your employed physician if you're on a foundation based. And then the exit strategy, this is the kind of thing I didn't think about really much before starting practice. And I'm still, I'm only in my 6th year, so I'm still on the early side of this. But looking at this before I actually signed my contract, it was like, how do you exit from some of these positions? And when Oren is talking about people that were interested in buying your private practice, he's absolutely right. I mean, I'm sure that is always going to be the case, but it is sort of a more complicated game that you have to play to exit from your private practice. And we know that because, I kind of watched Oren join his private practice. And so the person that he is now partnered with and himself had to go through a lot of different debates and conversations about it. So it's pretty simple to exit from an employed position compared to in private practice, I would say. So where's the winner here? I mean, who knows? I think there's lots of things to think about, and most of the time, I would imagine this is going to come down to personality aspects. I wanted to have some of the consistency, regularity, predictability of a more foundation-based model, and I didn't want to deal as much with some of the small business ownership issues that you get with private practice. But Oren's just the opposite. He loves the small business part. He loves the financials, and he actually enjoys that. So that's not a something that's taken away from his day to day. That's something he actually is still getting as a positive part of it. And so a lot of this is sort of a personality based conversation. Again, just putting a little plug in for Global Health. Come find me and talk about it afterwards if you guys have any interest. And otherwise, I'll wrap it up.